The brain obviously is divided into two halves. What are we going to call the half? What do you call it?
Hemisphere.
Hemisphere. If it's something round, they call it a sphere. So two halves, they call it hemisphere. So first you need to orient your brain. How do you orient yourself to the brain, the right and left, front and back? That's very important. What will you look for? The cerebellum. The little brain you see there on the back, that's your landmark. I always worry about landmark, otherwise I get lost when I drive. Something. Okay, I need to see some tower when I drive. Okay. So here your landmark is your cerebellum. That tells you I'm looking at the back of the brain. When I'm looking at the top of the brain, this is my lateral view, that's my back, this is my front, that's my top, this is my stem of the brain. Are you with me? So once you understand that, whether it's my brain, your brain, or anybody's brain, so what will be this hemisphere? Right. You know why you said right, so that's good. Alright, so that's the right and left. So the two hemispheres are divided. If you guys separated the two halves, right, the plastic model, if you were to put it together, you would have seen the gap between the two pieces. That gap is a deep cut. So what do you call that? Fissure. But it's along the length of the brain, so it's longitudinal fissure. Okay, so that's your longitudinal fissure. Alright, so that separates the two. But there is some structure, if you see inside the brain, in the sagittal view, can you see there is a whitish layer? That's actually the white matter pathway. It's kind of C-shaped. That's where actually the two pieces are connected. Anybody knows what's the name of that? Corpus callosum. Okay, not callosum. Don't make it callosum, it's callosum. Right? Then, if you see here, can you all see in the middle something like an egg or oval shaped area with a little dot? Ignore the dot. So this is your thalamus, another landmark. So this area right below that will be your hypothalamus. And can you see a bump here? That's your pons. And this is your stem of the brain, medulla oblongata. This is your spinal cord. So somewhere here when it becomes narrow, the very tip you start the spinal cord. So we will not worry about that. Right? Then there are more structures, but before we go into more details, if you see, can you run your palm on the surface of the brain if you want to, but wash your hands? Everybody is sneezing around this place, okay, including myself. So, and by the way, be aware, you heard the news, the Zika is locally transmitted in Florida. So do I have to care about it? If I were you, I will. I don't panic, but don't go when the mosquitoes are out there. You never know. The mosquitoes, all it takes is a couple of bites, and you may have it. So some people say, oh, I'm not pregnant. Well, others also have issues. Okay? So meaning, stay away from the bugs if you can. Alright, so if you touch the surface of the brain, you'll see it's kind of folded, right? There are membrane, there are ridges and furrows, or like elevations and depressions, both outside and inside. You see the same thing, right? So those raised elevation, what do you call that? What do you call the elevation, the raised areas? Gyrus. Gyri, plural. Forget about all the plural, please. Gyrus. So what about the groove? So if you see here, all this raised area, that's your gyrus. So what about that groove? Sulcus. Sulci, plural. I say ignore because the question will be named this, not named these. So instead of gyrus, don't put gyri. Instead of sulcus, don't put sulci in the exam. Alright. If you see model. This you may need for your lecture, not for the lab. One of the sulcus, or one of the sulci, meaning the single sulcus, most of them they are kind of random, they never really meet, but when you put the pieces together later on, you'll see there's one that goes pretty much across, not in a straight line, it's wavy, but they connect. That's another landmark. They call it central sulcus. You don't worry about it for the lab, but it's good if you know whenever you need it in the lecture. Okay, somewhere in the middle. It won't be like this, it will be going like this, but it will connect, meaning all others they don't meet there right now. Okay. So moving on, let's look at the cerebellum. The cerebellum, can you see there is a thin line that separates this half from the other half. The cerebellum also has hemispheres, two hemispheres, right and left. But in case of the cerebellum, depending on whether you're pointing to this end or this end, this will be on the away from the midline. So what do you call this?
Horizontal.
Away from the midline. Lateral. Close to the midline. Medial. So they use medial or lateral hemisphere of the cerebellum. Only in case of the cerebellum. Again, lateral hemisphere of the cerebellum. Whole thing. So when you refer to this, you have to say lateral hemisphere. Of course, you don't have to say right or left. If you know right or left, that's good. That's your right. That's your left. Again, medial, lateral. So can you see? If you put those two, if you guys have the two pieces, you can again try to put them together, or you can see if you stick your finger where they're supposed to be connected in the model. Can you see like a bunch of worms in the middle? But you need to touch the cerebellum and you need to touch in the right place from the back. We are looking from the back. Okay, so where you see the cerebellum, if you run your fingers inside where you are touching Daniela, that's where we call that because they look like worms, that goes with the name. They call it vermis. Vermis is the region that connects the right to the left hemisphere. Anything, if you are not following, if you are not with me, it's okay. You have all the time in the world to learn that. Okay, so we need to move on. Alright, so that's from the outside of the cerebellum. So the questions may be, name the entire structure, anywhere the pin is. If you are listening, anywhere the pin is, name the whole structure and entire structure. What will you say? Cerebellum, period. Name the part, then you have to be specific. Part is something, the entire structure is something. It could be on the vermis, don't assume, read the question. Name the entire structure, cerebellum. Name this specific structure, name this structure, name this part, then vermis. Name this part, lateral hemisphere of the cerebellum, and so on. Okay? Always read the question. The whole structure is your cerebellum. Because it's hard to label the cerebellum unless we put the arrow outside and somebody is going to knock the arrow off. Alright, so now if you see in the cross section, can you guys see the cross section of the cerebellum? You see something that looks like a tree, it's whitish in color, right? We call it the white matter. But we don't call it white matter because it looks like a tree, and they call it tree of life. But we don't need that word. What do we call that? Arbor. Arboretum means tree. Vita means life. Arborvitae. That's the tree-like structure. It's basically the white matter. The surroundings area is darker in color, that's gray matter. When you have myelinated neurons, so myelin, you remember the myelin sheath on the neuron? If it's there, it gives that light color. So that's why they call it the white matter, but the specific name is the arborvitae. The surrounding area is the gray matter, but we don't call any names for that. Okay, so that's in the sagittal view of the cerebellum. Okay. So we got the corpus callosum, thalamus, hypothalamus, pons, medulla, and all of that. We saw the gyrus sulcus both inside and outside. Alright.